Stephen Colbert stopped mid-sentence. The punchline died on his lips. His hand lowered to the desk. The studio went silent. So silent you could hear the air conditioning hum through the rafters. In the front row, a woman was crying. Not polite tears. Not the kind you dab away with a sleeve. These were the tears of someone whose body had betrayed a secret. A secret she had been keeping for 11 months. Shoulders shaking. Hands covering her face. Walls crumbling in real time. No one in that studio knew who she was. No one knew what she carried. Not yet. The cameras were still rolling. The producers were panicking. In the control room, voices crackled through headsets with increasing urgency. A commercial break was 90 seconds away. The director counted down in silence. The stage manager froze. And Stephen Colbert was walking away from his desk, toward a stranger, into a moment that television is never supposed to capture. Her name was Rebecca Thornton. 43 years old. CB 12. But those facts meant nothing. What mattered was what no one could see. What she had buried so deep that even her closest friends did not fully understand. Her son was sitting right beside her. His name was Daniel. 17 years old. 6'2". Healthy. Laughing at the monologue jokes just moments before. He had no idea what his mother was carrying. He thought this was a celebration. A reward for finishing his junior year with honors. A mother-son trip to New York City. Their first real vacation since everything changed. He had no idea what she was about to finally release. Because 11 months ago, Daniel had been given 6 months to live. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Stage 4. The doctors had gathered the family in a small room with beige walls and fluorescent lights that hummed like grief itself. They had used words like aggressive and treatment-resistant and palliative care. They had given statistics, percentages, timelines measured in weeks. Rebecca had held her son's hand through every word. She had nodded at the appropriate moments. She had asked the practical questions about pain management and quality of life. She had been the strong one. And then she had walked to her car in the hospital parking garage and screamed until her throat was raw. For 11 months, she had carried the weight of that diagnosis alone. Daniel knew he was sick, of course. He knew the chemotherapy was brutal. He knew the odds were bad, but Rebecca had never let him see her break. Never let him witness the hours she spent in the bathroom with the shower running, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Never let him know about the nights she stood in his doorway at 3 in the morning, just watching him breathe, trying to memorize the rise and fall of his chest. She had decided, in that moment in the parking garage, that she would not let her son see her grief. She would be his strength, his anchor, his illusion of hope. For 11 months, she had succeeded. And then Stephen Colbert started talking about mothers. It was supposed to be a light segment. A comedic bit about Mother's Day approaching. Stephen was reading from his note cards, making jokes about breakfast in bed and macaroni art, and the universal experience of receiving gifts that mothers pretend to love. The audience was laughing. The rhythm was comfortable. Everything was proceeding exactly as rehearsed. Then Stephen paused, set down his cards, and started talking about his own mother. He mentioned how she had raised 11 children mostly alone after his father and 2 brothers died in a plane crash when Stephen was 10. He talked about her strength, her faith, her ability to hold a family together through impossible grief. He said something about how mothers carry burdens their children never fully see, how they build invisible architectures of sacrifice that only become visible years later. How the weight they bear is measured not in pounds, but in silences. In the front row, Rebecca Thornton's hands began to shake. Daniel noticed. He reached for her arm, asked if she was okay. She nodded quickly, tried to smile, but her face was already crumbling. The careful architecture she had built over 11 months was collapsing in real time. The walls she had constructed brick by brick, silence by silence, fake smile by fake smile, were falling. She had carried this weight alone because she thought Daniel needed her to be strong. She had hidden her grief because she believed his survival depended on her unwavering hope. She had become an actress in her own life, performing confidence she did not feel, speaking optimism she did not believe. And now, in a late-night television studio, in front of 300 strangers, she was finally breaking. Stephen saw it. Of course he saw it. He had been in television long enough to read a room, to notice when something shifted in the carefully calibrated atmosphere. His eyes moved from the teleprompter to the front row, and for just a moment the mask slipped. The performer vanished. Something deeply human flickered across his face. The producer's voice was already in his ear, urging him forward, reminding him of the schedule. The celebrity guest waiting backstage. The commercial break, timed to the second. Keep moving. Stay on script. The show must go on. Stephen Colbert stopped mid-monologue. The laughter vanished instantly. He set down his note cards. Carefully, deliberately. He did not look at the camera. He looked at Rebecca. Then he did something that violated every unwritten rule of late-night television. He walked away from his desk. The audience did not know how to react. Some kept clapping, confused. Others went silent. The cameras followed Stephen as he moved, but you could sense the uncertainty in how they tracked him. This was not rehearsed. This was not in the blocking. The technical crew found themselves improvising in real time. Backstage, the celebrity guest stood frozen, watching the monitor, hair half-styled. No one told her what to do. Stephen stopped at the edge of the stage, maybe 8 feet from Rebecca Thornton, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to give her room to breathe. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, without the performance polish that usually coated every syllable. The voice of a man, not a host. He asked simply if she was all right. Rebecca could not answer. 11 months of silence had finally found their breaking point. Words were not going to come easily. But she shook her head. A small motion. Honest. The first honest gesture she had allowed herself in longer than she could remember. Daniel looked between his mother and the host of his favorite television show. Confusion mixed with fear on his young face. He had never seen his mother like this. Not once during the diagnosis. Not during the treatments. Not during the worst nights in the hospital when the fever spiked and the machines beeped warnings. She had always been the calm one, the strong one, the one who told him everything was going to be okay. Now she was crying in front of Stephen Colbert, and somehow that changed everything. If someone in your life is carrying something they have never said out loud, this story is for them. What happened in the next 40 seconds would never make it to air in its full form. But the people in that studio would talk about it for years. Stephen Colbert descended the 3 steps from the stage. He walked directly to Rebecca Thornton, and he knelt down, in front of a complete stranger, in front of 300 people, and he waited. He did not rush to fill the silence. He did not offer platitudes or easy comfort. He did not try to turn the moment into content. He just waited, hand resting on the armrest of the seat in front of her. Eyes steady on her face, present, patient, witnessing. The audience began to understand. Something was happening that transcended entertainment. A man 3 rows back started crying himself, moved by a grief he did not fully comprehend. The woman beside him reached for his hand without even knowing why. Daniel leaned forward, his voice trembling. He asked his mother what was wrong, really wrong, not the version she had been telling him for 11 months. And Rebecca Thornton, kneeling before the unexpected altar of Stephen Colbert's attention, finally told the truth. She told Daniel about the diagnosis, the real one, not the softened version the doctors had agreed to present to him, the one that had given him 6 months, the one that had said treatment resistant, the one that had used the word terminal. She told him about the nights she had spent planning his funeral, picking songs, choosing photos, writing the eulogy she had prayed she would never have to deliver. She told him about the support group she attended on Tuesday evenings, the one she said was a book club. She told him about the therapist she saw twice a week, the one she said was a yoga class. She told him everything. 11 months of silence, pouring out in a late-night television studio, in front of the host of a comedy show, while cameras that no one remembered to turn off captured every word. Stephen did not interrupt. He did not comfort. He did not try to redirect or manage or produce. He simply witnessed. A man who had lost his own father and brothers at age 10, who understood that some grief cannot be fixed, only witnessed. When Rebecca finally stopped talking, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of truths that had finally been spoken. Full of a relationship between mother and son that was being rebuilt in real time. Full of the particular alchemy that happens when someone stops pretending. Daniel was crying now too. Not the shocked tears of someone receiving bad news. He had known the news for 11 months, even if not all the details. These were the tears of someone finally understanding their mother. Finally seeing the weight she had been carrying alone. He put his arms around her. In front of 300 strangers. In front of Stephen Colbert. And he whispered something that the microphones could not catch. Whatever he said made Rebecca laugh through her tears. Subscribe and leave a comment, because this story challenges more than just emotions. Then Stephen did something remarkable. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. Not a prop, not a comedy bit. A real handkerchief. White cotton with blue stitching at the edges. He offered it to Rebecca with a small nod. She took it, wiped her eyes, looked at the host of the Late Show like she was seeing him for the first time. Stephen asked if he could share something with her. She nodded. He told her about his mother again. But this time, not the comedy version. The real version. He told her about the years after the crash, when his mother had carried grief so heavy it had bent her spine. He told her about watching her pretend to be okay for her children while falling apart in private. He told her about the moment, years later, when he had finally understood what that performance had cost her. He told Rebecca that the strongest thing his mother ever did was not pretending to be strong. It was finally admitting she was not. It was letting her children see her grief and learning that they were strong enough to help carry it. He told Rebecca that her son was sitting right beside her, that he was 17 years old and had already survived more than most adults ever face. That he did not need her protection anymore. He needed her honesty. He needed to know that the weight could be shared. The audience was completely silent. The scheduled commercial break had come and gone. The producer had stopped trying to signal Stephen back to his desk. The celebrity guest had found a chair backstage and was watching the monitor with tears streaming down her face. On a late-night comedy show, a conversation about death and honesty and the weight mothers carry was unfolding with more intimacy than most therapists' offices ever see. Daniel took his mother's hand, looked at Stephen Colbert, and said thank you. Not for the show, not for the entertainment, for seeing his mother when she needed to be seen. Stephen nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He asked Daniel about the diagnosis. Not the medical details, the lived experience. What it was like to be 17 and fighting for your life while trying to protect your mother from the truth of how scared you were. Daniel's answer lasted 4 minutes. The cameras captured every word. He talked about nights in the hospital when the fear was so overwhelming he would pretend to sleep so the nurses would leave him alone. He talked about watching his friends plan their senior years while he wondered if he would see graduation. He talked about the anger that had no target and the grief that had no voice. He talked about loving his mother too much to let her see how afraid he was. Mother and son, each carrying impossible weight, each hiding their fear to protect the other, each building walls of silence that had kept them apart even as they sat in the same hospital rooms. Until a late-night talk show host stopped his monologue and walked into the audience. When the show finally resumed, 43 minutes after schedule, Stephen returned to his desk with a different energy. The jokes still landed. The celebrity interview still happened. The bit still worked. But something had shifted in the room. Something had been witnessed that changed the atmosphere. At the end of the show, Stephen broke format one more time. He looked directly into the camera and spoke without note cards. He said that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stop pretending. Stop performing strength we do not feel. Stop building walls that keep out the people who love us most. He said that Rebecca and Daniel Thornton had taught him something tonight about the courage it takes to be vulnerable, about the strength required to finally be honest. He thanked them for being his teachers. The studio audience did not applaud on cue. They rose slowly. 300 people standing because sitting felt impossible. The ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Not for Stephen Colbert, the performer. For Rebecca Thornton. For Daniel. for the truth that had finally been spoken. If this story reached you, comment below. 2 words. I see you. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca Thornton became an unexpected voice for parents carrying impossible diagnoses. She started a blog, then a support group, then a foundation. The handkerchief Stephen had given her, now framed, hangs in the foundation's office. A reminder that the moment someone finally sees your truth is the moment healing becomes possible. Daniel graduated high school that spring. Against every statistical probability. Against the 6-month prognosis that should have been his death sentence. His mother sat in the audience, openly crying, holding the same handkerchief. Not hiding her tears. Not pretending to be strong. Just being present. Being honest. Being his mother. The doctors called it a miracle. Rebecca called it something else. She called it the power of finally being seen. Of dropping the performance. Of letting the weight be shared. Stephen Colbert never publicly discussed what happened that night in detail. In a brief mention on a later show, he simply said this: some moments remind you why you wanted to work in television in the first place. Not for the jokes, not for the ratings, but for the chance, however rare, to create a space where people can be truly seen. But those who were in the studio that night tell a different story about what changed. They say Stephen started pausing more during his monologues. Not for comedic timing, but to actually look at the audience. To see them not as a collective mass generating laughter, but as individual people carrying individual stories. They say he began keeping handkerchiefs in his desk drawer. Not for himself, for guests, for audience members, for anyone who might need permission to finally let go. And they say that somewhere in his office, there is a photo that Rebecca Thornton sent him months later. Daniel at his graduation. Cap and gown, diploma in hand, smile so wide it barely fits in the frame. Behind him, Rebecca, not performing strength, just being present, just being proud, just being honest about the miracle she was witnessing. Daniel Thornton is 22 now, graduated college, works at a nonprofit that supports families navigating childhood cancer. He carries a handkerchief in his pocket, not because he needs it, because it reminds him of the night his mother finally stopped pretending. He speaks at hospitals sometimes, tells his story to kids in treatment and parents in waiting rooms. He always mentions that night at the Late Show. Not the celebrity, not the entertainment. The moment a stranger walked away from his desk and knelt beside a woman who needed to be seen. The moment that changed everything. Rebecca still runs the foundation, still speaks at conferences, still tells the story of the night she broke down in front of Stephen Colbert and found the strength she had been pretending to have. She always talks the same way. She talks about the architecture of silence, the walls we build to protect the people we love, the weight we carry alone because we think sharing it would be weakness. And she talks about what happens when someone finally sees through those walls. When a stranger asks if you are okay and actually waits for the honest answer. When the performance finally ends and the truth finally begins. Share and subscribe, so this moment of humanity is never lost. Stephen Colbert did not fix Rebecca Thornton that night. He did not heal her son. He did not cure the cancer or change the diagnosis. He simply saw her. He walked away from his desk, knelt beside a stranger, and witnessed her truth without trying to manage it or produce it or turn it into content. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes being seen is the first step toward being saved. The handkerchief still hangs in the foundation office, blue stitching on white cotton, a reminder that the weight we carry alone becomes lighter the moment someone finally asks to help. A reminder that somewhere in a late-night television studio, a host stopped being a performer and became a witness. And in that moment, changed 2 lives forever. Because that is what that night taught him. That the most powerful thing a person with a platform can do is sometimes simply stop, listen, witness, and let the silence speak.